Hi, everybody. This is Ryan Clancy, Chief Strategist for No Labels, here for another episode of No Labels Talks. And this week, we have a very special guest who has quite a history with No Labels. Pat McCrory, former governor of North Carolina, former co-chair of national co-chair of No Labels. We wanted to have him on this week for a couple reasons. One is he has been in the midst of helping his state recover from the horrific Hurricane Helene that hit several weeks ago, and we want to get a sense for how the state's doing and how the response is going. But of course, North Carolina is going to be one of the pivotal states in the election here in a couple of weeks, and we want to get his sense on what it feels like on the ground there and what the things are to look for in North Carolina. So, Governor, thank you for joining us.
An honor. It's great seeing my friends from No Labels. I love you guys, and I'm proud of you too.
Likewise. Thank you, Governor. Look, let's start here. Just such a horrific storm that hit Southeast U.S. and North Carolina in particular. Could you just tell us how the state's doing and how the recovery's going?
Well, we're like three different states. We have the coastal area, which usually gets hit by the hurricanes. Then we have the Piedmont area called the foothills, which is Greensboro, Winston, Raleigh, all the way to Charlotte. And then right west of Charlotte, literally 45 minutes from Charlotte, we have some major flooding with this hurricane that really was a hurricane. In fact, 8 years ago when Hurricane Matthews came, I said that we need to change the hurricane ratings to include water, because it's very misleading. When the wind goes down, they downgrade the hurricane, it becomes a tropical storm. But regards to water, it is a hurricane, and it is water that kills people. And in Hurricane Matthew back in 2016, we had 28 people drown. And now we've lost, I'm sure, over about 100 people now, and there are still bodies to be retrieved, which is a very emotional thing for the families that are still losing or can't find their loved ones. And most likely they're downstream somewhere in the brush or the mud or in a lake. And it's very, very sad. And what we also have to realize, in the western part of the state, in the rural part of the mountains, it's a lot of poor people who live in mobile homes or trailers. And the only place you can put a mobile home and trailers in the mountains is in the ravines where the creeks are. And that's the only flat area. So a lot of these mobile homes got swept up. And it's probably the people that are missing now are the people in the rural areas that have been cut off and where the major water just rushed down, and these people didn't have a chance. So it's a very sad issue with especially the poor people that were not given a chance in this flood. The other two major points is that the infrastructure was just wiped out. Anywhere near the river, the city of Asheville, which is a large city, 350,000 or so, beautiful, beautiful city, they lost their water sewer system. It was underwater. So you can't imagine the pollution downstream, and also the people that were swept away in Asheville in the arts district, which we call the arts district. And so they lost power, they lost communication, and they lost water, which is extremely serious when that happens. They're getting most of the water back, but it's not clean water, so they still have to boil it. And this has been a long time now. The other thing you have to realize, during all the issues where Trump and Harris and Biden and the governor were given press conferences and giving updates, you've got to remember almost the entire West was in the dark. They were not seeing these press conferences. So there's an assumption that the people in the middle of the storm and the recovery know what's going on. They are in the total dark. And again, this is only an hour, hour and a half from Charlotte. I have a lake house in Lake James, an hour and 40 minutes from Charlotte, and we were in the dark. We didn't know what was going on. While everyone else knows what's going on when a storm goes, if you get your internet cut off now, you have no news whatsoever. So they're just now being made aware of the political consequences of this. And frankly, at this point in time, if they're still at loss of power or water or the internet, they don't care at this point in time. about the issues that are arising. So that's kind of a quick summary of the only other thing, having experience as a mayor and governor, after about 7 days of being without, the anger starts coming up. And the people who are still without and cut off from access, they are getting angry at this point in time. And it's a natural dynamic that occurs. And some people feed on that anger, and that anger might come out in the election too.
Governor, you mentioned when you were serving, you were governor. Hurricane Matthew was, of course, the big storm that hit your state. Several dozen people died. It was a serious enough storm that FEMA did have to get involved. I was wondering if you could talk people through how that unfolds, where you see a storm coming. How and when does the federal government and FEMA start to get engaged, and then how do you coordinate with the feds so you're kind of working seamlessly to deliver the aid that's needed?
It's a great question, Ryan. First of all, there's a lot of confusion about FEMA's role. FEMA's not in charge of a state. The governor and the emergency operations staff is in charge of a state, and the mayors are basically in charge of their towns or cities. They're the ones who ask for the FEMA help. So if there's anything going wrong, it's usually at the state level regarding communications. They bring FEMA in. So the dilemma we had with this hurricane, and both defense and maybe a little criticism of the governor and others, is that there was very little preparation time because someone was asleep at the wheel in whatever agency going, there's a lot of water coming. This could be serious because we have computer models, which I used to use. Every state now is these incredible computer models where they can predict where the flooding will occur if 10 inches, 12 inches, 15 inches of rain come. And that didn't happen. Now, the day before the storm came, some people said evacuate, get out, but there wasn't action to close the roads, put barriers, because as governor, what I do is, what roads are going to flood based upon certain, so you close the roads and you evacuate certain areas, hopefully a day or 2 days before. This was very unique. Again, it was called a tropical storm instead of a hurricane. And I think a lot of this problem is a breakdown in communications, which could be solved very easily if we quit using this hurricane language. Even the media, if you're not on a beach, it's not a hurricane. And where people die is inland, not on the beaches. They die inland most of the time. And that was true with Hurricane Matthews. There'll be an after evaluation, and I hope there'll be some lessons learned. But FEMA comes in at the request of the governor and the mayors, and there probably need to be some revisiting. And what they do is they place the equipment right outside the damaged area so they can move it in.
Right.
They close roads. They work on the water sewer systems to protect it from potential flooding. They get the military in right outside the area so they can come in with immediate repair. They work with the electric utility companies and the Verizons, the communications money. You got to remember, it's not all government that's the problem. It's the private sector runs the electric system, some of the water system, and also the internet. And without command and control, you're lost. And we had a lot of counties that lost all communications. So the emergency operations director in these very small counties within these mountain reserves, they were without communication for 3 or 4 days. So I hope that describes the situation a little bit.
It does. Well, I mean, Governor, look, if nothing else, a storm like this, we act sometimes like politics and the daily stuff we fight about is the most important thing. And this is a reminder that it's not. I mean, this is life and death stuff. But
absolutely,
with that caveat in place, we are, of course, thinking about politics. It is just 2.5 weeks out from the election. And North Carolina is going to be pivotal. I want to just remind people here, give people some numbers. North Carolina, 15 electoral votes. Former President Trump won the state in 2020 by about 70,000 votes. He had just about, it was a 49-48 race.
And that's out of probably about 5 million votes.
Out of about 5 million. That's right. So North Carolina currently has an incumbent governor, though he is a Democratic governor, though he's termed out. And we have a really interesting dynamic, Governor, I'd love you to talk about, which is the Democratic candidate is a guy named Josh Stein. The Republican candidate is a guy named Mark Robinson, who's the lieutenant governor. To say that Mark Robinson is controversial really understates things. And those of you who are listening by audio, if you looked at the grin on the governor's face, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Look, this guy's crazy. Let's just say it. He is, despite the fact that it's kind of a swing state, he's losing by a lot. Governor, my question to you is this. There's been some speculation that there could be reverse coattails in this state, which is to say, usually we talk about somebody at the top of the ticket affecting somebody, down ticket in a House or a Senate race. Do you think it's possible that this Republican governor candidate, Robinson, could be so toxic that he could cost Trump the state?
Well, anything that might cost 2,000 to 10,000 votes could cost anyone the state, and it could. Yeah. Robinson, what the Democrats are doing, there's a long story with Robinson, but a lot of us saw this as a ticking time bomb a long time ago. He ran for lieutenant governor because of a YouTube video in front of a Greensboro City Council meeting. He was probably the first social media superstar, at least in North Carolina, even nationally. Plus, he was African-American Republican. He was a big, bold, heavy-set guy. I've never seen a guy suck the oxygen out of the room like him, grab the base by the palm of their hands, much more than Trump ever did. I tried to follow him in a speech one time after I was out of the governor's office, and I refused to do it. I just went, this isn't worth it. And I used the excuse, we're over time. Yeah. I mean, it was just bombastic, powerful, emotional. I've never seen a guy like this before in my life, but I also thought he was dangerous. He just went over the edge. He was so popular among the Republican rural base that Ted Budd used him in a Club for Growth commercial against me. I mean, how many times do you have a lieutenant governor candidate used in a U.S. Senate race? And after that commercial where Mark Robinson said, Pat McCrory, he's not a true conservative, and then he accused me of putting bad books in our schools as governor, which was news to me. It worked. My polls, I got booed within 3 days when I'd go to Republican meetings. This guy was powerful, but he got over his skis, and he could take down some votes. What the Democrats are doing now, every council of state member is using Democrat. Any picture of Mark Robinson with a Republican candidate now, ever since the porn information came out. Sure. So you've got an attorney general race where I'm partners with Mark Robinson. You've got a education race, even Trump commercials going, Trump and Mark Robinson. The Democrats are just jumping all over it.
Governor, how would you characterize North Carolina today? Because it's a very interesting state in that it's one that, for many years was a red state in presidential elections. Then President Obama won the state when he ran. Then it flipped back to Trump. Do you think of North Carolina today as a true toss-up state, or do you think it's leaning one way or the other?
Well, I think it's always been a purple state for the last 20 years. I mean, look, we've elected John Edwards and Jesse Helms. Yeah. We've elected Jim Hunt and Jesse Helms. We've elected Pat McCrory and Kay Hagan. We tend to vote more conservative at the national races, at the Senate races and the presidential races, but there are exceptions with Obama. We tend to vote more Democratic at statewide gubernatorial elections, as I'm an example of that. We've only had 3 Republican governors since the Civil War. And yet we've elected a lot of conservative U.S. senators. Ted Budd, the most recent, Tom Tillis, who's a little more moderate, and Jesse Helms and so forth. But Kay Hagan slipped in there, and so did John Edwards, came out of nowhere. So the metro areas have become totally blue. We're the 9th most populous state in the nation. Most people don't know that in DC or in New York or California. 9th most populous state. So it does have all these electoral votes, and the metro areas are blue and the rural areas are red. And it used to be flipped that when I moved to North Carolina in 1966. The metro areas used to be red and the rural areas used to be blue. It's done a total flip like the rest of the nation.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting state.
I want to ask you about the issues, because if you look at and there's some new polling out this week on the signature concerns of voters in this election, and far and away, at least nationally, it's inflation is number one, even though it's moderated. I mean, this is what people miss. When the government data says, "Oh, inflation is moderating." Yeah, well, eggs are still 25% more expensive than they were a couple of years ago, so people don't see that. But in inflation and immigration are 1 and 2, pretty much any poll. Would you say those are the key issues? Like when you think about the political ads that you're seeing on both sides, are they mostly about inflation and immigration, or are there other issues that are having more salience in North Carolina?
The Harris campaign and the Democrats statewide campaign are running on abortion. Very, very strong, going after the female vote. I mean, extremely strong. Suddenly also, which is kind of ironic, the Trump campaign is suddenly running a lot of transgender commercials, women in sports, women in locker rooms, which is kind of ironic. It's an issue I got caught up in 8 years ago. And it's been kind of reversed since then, ever since the Budweiser. So the political situation has put the Democrats on their heels. The abortion situation has put the Republicans on their heels. So I'd say 60, 70% of the commercials are about inflation and immigration, mainly on the Republican side. The social issues are starting to leak in now, probably to get that small vote that's independent. Even the African American vote, they're going after the Republicans are going after the male African Americans with the transgender issue, and you're seeing that nationally, but you're also seeing it down the ticket issues, and the abortion issue is still very big on commercials.
Governor,
and Trump, by the way, Trump's character,
of course,
if the Democrats are big on that too.
Governor, I'm sorry I don't know this off the top of my head, but in North Carolina, what is the current law on the books as it relates to abortion?
That's a great question. It's actually the North Carolina legislature passed a 12-week abortion with exceptions, which for North Carolina, if I would have ever recommended 12 weeks as a Republican governor, I would have been kicked out of the party. I stayed out of we didn't do anything. I think we did a 72-hour waiting period before an abortion, and I got slammed for that by the left. But for the Republican legislature to do a 12-week, that's quite liberal. And now most people don't know it, though. Most people don't know what the state law is because it's all about Roe versus Wade. If you ask the person on the street, I bet the acumen of understanding the abortion laws in North Carolina is zero.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. Compared to Georgia or Florida, it's quite liberal by a supermajority Republican. And I think they saw the writing on the wall, which shows me how much has changed in my 8 years since I've been out of office.
Right. Governor, what are you hearing about mail voting, early voting, and the effect that the storm has had? There was some early reporting, I think, for example, that there was, and I forgot the county, but that 40,000 mail early vote ballots had went out and only like 1,000 had been returned, which suggested that there was a real lag, at least initially. Is the sense in the state that this storm is going to meaningfully affect turnout?
I don't think it will in the West, but the population is quite low.
Okay,
You got to remember Asheville's the largest city impacted. Charlotte, by the way, even parts of Charlotte were impacted, but nothing enough to impact the election. So it'll be the western rural areas, which are totally red, and Asheville, which is totally blue. And this is going to be political too. How quick will the Asheville access be versus the rural areas right on the Tennessee border, which, by the way, North Carolina, the Tennessee border, you're talking about Appalachia.
sure.
You're talking about, but the populations are very small. But again, it can make a difference of 5 to 10,000 votes.
Well, speaking of things that could make a little bit of a difference both way or the other, I mean, is there anything else on the ballot in a couple weeks? Ballot initiatives, referendums that will, you think, otherwise drive turnout?
No, I think the big question you asked at the beginning, will the governor's race with Stein and Robinson? By the way, Stein is the first Jewish American. He's of the Jewish faith. Attorney General. Democrats have a history of promoting the Attorney General, going to Easley, Cooper, now Stein.
Sure.
White men, lawyers with a lot of money behind them, trial lawyer money behind them. They're liberal, but they run very moderate campaigns. And the whole governor's race is all about Robinson. No one knows a thing about Stein. He's just everything about. It's a very effective commercial in Robinson where they have him on camera in a forum saying women need to keep their skirts down.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it's extremely powerful.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, the women need to keep their skirts down. By the way, I hate to defend him, but he also said, and the men need to keep their pants. They cut that part. But for the women to hear, you need to keep your skirt down.
Yeah.
That commercial is the most effective commercial I see in North Carolina political history.
So is it fair to say that, between Trump and Robinson, I mean, the lion's share of Democratic messaging, it sounds like, is just the character deficiencies of both of them? Is that's a huge part of it?
Yeah, and Trump has been avoiding Robinson for over a month. Before the porn site in Hitler, whatever it was, broke by CNN, which was obviously fed, and they fed it the day that we couldn't replace Robinson. It wasn't enough time to replace him. So I question the timing, but that's politics. Someone held it, I'm sure. It's just too coincidental. But Trump, I know for a fact the Trump team probably got some warning that they better be careful with Robinson, because 2 months before, all the tapes of Trump going, Robinson's my man, those were 4 to 6 months old. So Robinson, before the story broke, Robinson was not invited to a Trump rally, but he went on stage anyway with a bunch of sheriffs. I mean, this guy's aggressive.
Yeah.
And I think the Trump people were going, oh my gosh. And this is before the story broke.
Sure.
So they saw some gray clouds, dark clouds coming.
I bet. Well, I'm going to get to questions in a moment, and if you have one, just press the little yellow raise hand button, and I'll be happy to call on you. But before we do that, Governor, just one question, final question for you, which is, this state pretty well. You've ran, what was it, 7 mayoral races for governor, your Senate race, where you got kneecapped by the far right in your primary, which we've talked about on other occasions. But if you had to bet that lake house on the outcome of this election,
my lake house is still out of the water, so be careful about mentioning my lake house. My dock is still hanging on, so
that's good. But who would you bet on today?
Let me tell you the one thing that hasn't been talked about. I brought it up to CNN or something one time, but no one's caught on. I think what I call the COVID immigrant vote is going to make or break what happens in Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada, which are all swing states. And what I mean by the COVID immigrant vote is those people that move to the Sunbelt states during and after COVID and haven't left because they're working out of their homes still. You know, it doesn't matter if you're in New York City or in Pittsburgh. They're working from Hilton Head or Figure Eight Island or wherever, or Florida, and tens of thousands of people moved to North Carolina and Georgia and Nevada from California, New York, Pennsylvania. We don't know who those people are. We don't know how they're going to vote. And to Charlotte, a lot of people moved to Charlotte. It was a migration occurred during COVID because you could work anywhere. It didn't matter. New York was shut down. The cities were shut down, and it's still somewhat where you don't have to go into work. So this is Zoom. Zoom has changed the world.
Well, and
so that's my other theory of the unknown is the COVID immigrant vote. I use immigrant, internal immigration moving from New York, California. And I guarantee it's a heck of a lot more than the 1 or 2% that this could swing. And are they Trump voters? Are they Nikki Haley voters? Are they Harris voters? And the other big issue, you know, we're right next to I'm 10 miles from South Carolina right now. The Nikki Haley voter, we don't know what they're going to do. The no labels voter, we don't know what the no labels voter is going to do. Are they going to vote? Are they going to vote write-in? Are they going to vote for their party now? Remember when Nancy's vision, you know, based upon your statistics, was if 65% of the people aren't satisfied with other candidate, what choice do they have?
Yeah.
I think an interesting question to ask, Ryan, what is the percentage now of people who still don't like either candidate or are going, can't we do better than this? I don't know what those numbers are, but, you know, maybe it's the no labels vote, which will be the difference in states like North Carolina. How's that for a good hit to you back? That
would be some poetic justice after we tried to get that candidate, but couldn't quite.
I love. It was a great effort. It was it was both idealistic and pragmatic at the time.
Yeah,
I've given you. I think we were sabotaged, but we'll talk about that another time.
Oh, you don't have to think we were sabotaged. We were. It's all out there in the Department of Justice complaint, which you can all look up. But we're not going to cry over spilled milk. Let me get to some questions here. Starting with, and if you can just say where you're from. I know where this first caller's from, but Clarin.
I can unmute there. Thanks for being with us, Governor.
Oh, it's great seeing you.
So nice to see you again. A quick one that I hope you can put in the chat, and then I'll ask the second one. I hope you can send us a link to those charities that are the neediest right now, or who you think we should help if we can. Additionally, I know we've been solicited by groups, but if you have a good idea, I'd like to know that. And I just read a John Ellis column a couple days ago about registrations in the key battleground states. And it was interesting that North Carolina had added about 500,000 additional registered voters compared to 4 years ago. And the Democratic registrations decreased by 126,000 and the Republicans increased by 156. The totals for the Republicans are 2.2 million. The Democrats are 2.4. So the Democrats still have more registrations, but the registrations have gone down, and that 43% of the new registrants were under age 30 compared to only 20% back in 2020. Do you think that captures the COVID piece, or do you think there's something else going on? Because go ahead.
That's a great question, and it's great seeing you again.
You too.
I think it does catch some of the COVID piece, but a lot of the COVID voters, I think young people have been moving here regardless. They've been moving to North Carolina for the last 25 years. Charlotte is gaining 500 people a week. I mean, it's just incredible. But I think there's a middle, 40s to 70s that are moved here and are just making North Carolina their permanent home.
Yeah.
And you see it along the coastal areas, anywhere in the water, and the mountains, by the way. So if I had to predict who the COVID immigration voter is, I don't know if that's the right term, but I would probably slant toward Republican.
Yeah. Well, this looks like the registrations are going in that direction.
Because they can afford it. I think it's more the middle upper class Republican that has moved from New York and moved from some of the urban centers because they could, while keeping their job.
This also said that 93 out of the 100 counties have more registered Republicans than 4 years ago.
But you also have to remember in North Carolina, the independent vote outnumbers both Democrat and Republican. Go look at that. See, unless that's changed. So there are more independent voters than Democrats, the party, and the Republican Party.
It does.
So that's
unaffiliated gains.
unaffiliated. Yeah.
Republicans and unaffiliated gains more ground than the Democrats.
By the way, one political thing, Ryan, that's happened here too is the elections board is controlled by the governor, Democratic governor. He's been doing everything he can to keep third parties off, thinking they'll hurt. So remember, they tried to kick, you and I had worked together trying to get no labels, and they delayed us for 2 or 3 months, cost us a lot of money. They did the same thing to JFK. And then they tried to keep JFK on the ballot when he tried to withdraw, because they at first they tried to keep JFK off, then they tried to keep him on. They just lost that court case, so JFK is off. The Green Party is on.
Green Party is on.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, we're very familiar with those shenanigans. Frank, looks like we have a question from you.
Yes, Craig from Fort Worth. Thanks, Governor, for joining us today. A few months ago, the jobs report nationally was corrected to show actually a lowering of 800,000 jobs from what had originally been reported, a fairly significant percentage decrease. And then just last week, the FBI corrected its violent crime statistics for 2022. The Democrats had been touting that violent crime had actually gone down under this administration. They cited the 2022 data, a 1.7% decrease. Yet last week, the FBI corrected that, and it now shows a 4.5% increase. Yet only a few media outlets, as you might expect, the conservative ones, are covering it because it's not favorable to the Democrats. Do you sense that there's any lack of trust in government reporting on data? And sometimes it's just the data gets corrected. You can't help that. But do you sense that the American people are starting to question data when it comes? Do they have any belief in it?
It doesn't help the situation, but I would say this: in my experience, the unemployment data has been pretty consistently off. I remember during my term, y'all might not know this, but the governors actually get the unemployment data before it's released, and they are not allowed to tell anyone. They have to hold it. So as governor, when I was governor for 4 years, I used to get the report before it was released, and I couldn't say a word. And of course, when it's coming up to election time, you'd go, oh, I want to release this or I don't. But we never did. So it's amazing how it isn't leaked before it is, because it could influence the market, things of that nature. The crime statistics, I never believed either. What's been happening for 20, 30 years, there's a lot of people not reporting crime now because the police aren't reporting it as much. In fact, they aren't taking the calls. What used to be reported is just tossed off now, especially break-ins and things of that nature. You just call it in. So some of the crime statistics, I've been a little worried because I knew in Charlotte here, our murder rate's been going up tremendously here in Charlotte. Very disturbing to me. So I pray it wasn't political. I just can't imagine anyone being so stupid to make it political. But I didn't. By the way, the crime reports were showing a decrease in the rate of crime. That's like saying the decrease in the rate of inflation's gone down. But what time period are you measuring regarding inflation or crime or anything else? And that's an issue the media never really follows up on. And I could say that regarding both sides of the aisle. These short periods, you got to look at the term the rate on both inflation, employment, and crime.
Good perspective there.
And one of the things too on the
Okay.
FBI crime data was that it was a new reporting system that had just been in place, and some cities weren't reporting it. So there was a lot to the story, but it altogether seems like you can't trust data anymore.
For the last 50 years, some cities have always been a little derelict in their crime reporting. And it's really what crime is allowed in the report. And it's city to city, and it's small town to large cities. Who knows? You got to remember, sheriffs and other people are elected officials, and police chiefs report to mayors, but most of it's the trend usually shows you over a long period of time what's happened.
Yeah. Thanks, Governor. Raquel, you have a question.
Governor McCrory, so good to see you again. We did a valiant fight, didn't we? Yeah. I having been a reporter for NBC, my heart just goes out to, you know, the people there that you're serving and the devastation, seeing it firsthand. It's just, you know, our prayers are with them. But I guess my question for you is, you listened to the focus groups and you heard how many people were so passionate about saying that they're independents. And we see the rising number of people that are nonpartisan. And how much do you think we're going to see apathy as a response come November, where people are like, I already said I didn't. I mean, I realize there's a different candidate for the Democratic Party, but some people don't see that really as a significant change. So how much do you think apathy is going to influence the voter turnout? And then what do you think No Labels can continue to do to galvanize momentum, because now our goals and priorities have to shift?
Well, first of all, you were a great committee member, and we kept our little committee together, and I just thought you did a great job and asked the great questions. Second, I don't know the answer to your question. I think we're in the same spot we were when No Labels and Nancy and you and others came up with this concept of going, wait a minute, is there a 35% of the people don't want either candidate? I don't know. It'd be interesting if Ryan did a survey now, what that would come across as. I'm hearing that where people still are coming up to me, can't we do better than this, Pat? Why are these the only two candidates that we have? And it'd be curious, what did we get up to 65%? It was around that level. It'd be curious if we're still at that level or not. I have no idea. And I think that's why I don't try. People think I know who's going to win this, and I don't think we know, because we don't know the answer to your question. How's that?
Well, good point. Good point. But what can we do you think? Because I know you're such a big supporter in the efforts of No Labels. I mean,
I still
what
am.
can we do to galvanize the momentum and keep our own people from becoming apathetic in the face of, you know, challenges?
I think now more than ever, the No Labels people, first, they need to vote. They need to keep their voice, because I think we can still be a group that they're going to have to negotiate with in order to get votes in DC and maybe at the gubernatorial levels. That we can, I think No Labels has to remain strong to be used as leverage. Because if the balance of power is still going to be like this, by 1 or 2 points and House and Senate divided, that's where your power is going to come from, almost like a parliamentary system. And in fact, it might be a good time to build that power. And part of that leverage might be next time we will do a third party candidate. And we think we'll find someone who will be credible and can win. So I don't want No Labels to give up. I think leverage is going to be very important in finding solutions and problem solving and a middle ground.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great seeing you again.
And we have one final question here from Jeff. Jeff, go ahead.
Yes, Governor. I'm in the Atlanta area, but I'm a North Carolina native and grew up in Spartanburg, up in South Carolina. And I've been following the Helene story very closely. I have a lot of friends on Facebook who are up there, and the ones that have internet, they're in pretty much bad shape and very frustrated, and as you mentioned, very angry about what they consider to be a lack of response and lack of concern by the federal government. I know Harris has visited there. I don't know if Donald Trump has been in the area, but you know, to me, the devastation has just been amazing. I never would have thought that flooding could have ever taken place in the Asheville area, and Jimmy Rock, I know, has been totally wiped out. My question is, you know, as you mentioned, Asheville is very left-leaning, and the counties surrounding it in that area of North Carolina are very right-leaning. They're very red. Do you think that the response has been adequate as far as the federal government and the concern the candidates have shown for the people there has been adequate, and how you think this might affect the votes of the people in Western North Carolina who've been through this?
Well, again, I emphasize, I think there's too much put on the federal government. It's the state that's primarily responsible for planning and recovery. They use a lot of federal resources. I think there may be criticism down the road, and I got to be very careful being a former governor, and I don't want to, something happened where they didn't anticipate what was going to happen in the storm, where we didn't have position re-equipped, and there are things out there. Why didn't we bring the military in from the old Fort Bragg immediately and get helicopters in and things of that nature? But I will say this, in their defense, the mountains are a whole different ball game than Eastern North Carolina, which I had to deal with. Eastern North Carolina was hard enough. The mountain access, and when the roads are wiped out, there are no other alternatives, and it's very, very difficult. So I think some of the anger is justified. I think some of the rumors were reckless too. It's probably a middle ground there. Yeah, they could have done better, but also some of the things I'm reading on the internet are just false. And some of the sheriffs out there were having real problems. Now, I will say too, there's some armed militia in some of these small areas. You're just reading about that. Now, what their intent was, you talk to the mountain people, they're going, they were there to really help. They help. But when you have outsiders coming to the mountain areas, and you
they
see
don't like that always.
militias, they go, I'm not hanging around here. And it's a different culture. I mean, it goes back to the 17. You got to remember that back in the 1700s, these people were the ones who won the British War.
Well,
The
Scotch Irish, yep,
the Revolutionary War was not primarily fought in Boston and New York. It was fought in North Carolina and South Carolina, where you are. Some of the biggest revolutionary battles were up through South Carolina and Greensboro. General Greene, it was named after General Greene. Mm-hmm. And our civics don't teach us that. So, but this goes back to the history books of these people are very independent people, and they don't like government. In fact, in a way,
Scots Irish, yep, they don't like government.
And in fact, it's funny. The hippies and the libertarian gun guys, they kind of get along in the mountain ranges. They just don't want. It's not a huge population, but boy, I saw it on the campaign trail. I'll end by saying this, Ryan. I was given a speech one time in one of my many races right on the Tennessee border, overlooking Tennessee, and I came up to the bluegrass band on top of a mountain to thank them for coming to my fundraiser. And I said, so y'all from around here? And they went, yeah, we've only been out of the state twice, once over there to Tennessee and once to Charlotte. And they weren't smiling. I was mayor of Charlotte at the time. I mean,
Governor, you know your state, which is why we were very happy to have you on here. Thank you so much for your perspective on the storm, and we hope that recovery continues to pick up. People can get their lives back, and certainly we'll be watching very closely on election night, because North Carolina, as it always is lately, will be pivotal.
God bless y'all, and keep No Labels strong, and I'll do anything I can to support y'all. I love y'all, and the leverage is going to be important. All of y'all stay in tune with No Labels. That leverage could make the difference in our democracy down the road.
Governor, thank you for that. And thank you all for joining, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.